Podcast.
Touchdown Ram! Recovered by the Chargers. Touchdown UCLA!
With USC great and NFL stud, Frostee Rucker.
The Trojans back in front!
And LAFB founder Ryan Dyrud on the Believe Podcast Network and LAFBnetwork.com. This is your destination for Los Angeles football.
What's up, LA? This is Ryan Dyrud with the LA Football Podcast, and support for LAFB is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision engineering tools for your family jewels. Guys, I know a lot of you skip past these ads or just ignore them, but this is one that will actually benefit you every single time you use this product. The worst thing you can do is get nicks, cuts, scrapes, gashes, anything to your southern region down below. It's painful. It's gross. You don't want it. So that's why Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer. The Manscaped engineering team spent 18 months, that's a year and a half, perfecting the greatest ball hair trimmer ever created and just released the new and improved Lawnmower 3.0. And even better, you get 20% off and free shipping with the code LAFB at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code LAFB. I promise you, your balls will thank you. What's up, Los Angeles? Thanks for tuning in. This is the LA Football Podcast on the Believe Podcast Network, always on the LA Football Network, LAFBnetwork.com. Got a great show for you today. Writing solo dolo today. Frost has a busy week traveling and whatnot, so I wanted to get just something out there. We're going to record, obviously, together later in the week. Have a great guest coming up. Super excited about. We have a few guests that, guys, I'm excited about. We got some good stuff coming on this LA Football Podcast. Not trying to toot our own horn, but I think it's just people you'll appreciate listening to. I mean, that's the reason why we're doing it, right? Hopefully, we get guests on here that will get you excited about listening to this show. So that's all coming up. But for this episode, I apologize. It's going to be just me, unfiltered, Ryan Dyrud, your host, for 30 minutes to an hour. I'm going to try to keep it around 30, 35 minutes, but I feel like even when I'm by myself, I've noticed that once I get rolling, once I get talking football, I can push these things. So we'll try to keep it to that 30 to 40 minute mark. Yeah, got a good show. We're going to talk free agency. I really want to get into realistic free agent options for both your Los Angeles Rams and your Los Angeles Chargers. I have an article going up on LAFBnetwork.com regarding the Rams, 8 realistic free agents, so that'll be up there. So make sure to check that out. We already have plenty up already on the Rams and on the Chargers regarding free agency, so plenty of stuff if you for some reason haven't consumed enough or haven't seen enough. But that's what I'm going to get into on today's episode, because I feel like I see a lot of stuff, and referring to Twitter, that's what Twitter is, but I feel like I see a lot of very unrealistic expectations and hopes, and I understand where that can come from. But yeah, we'll get into it. So first, before we just get rolling, let's go ahead and mention the sponsor of the show, BetOnline.Ag. And, beginning of the show, we had the Manscaped ad going, repping the Manscaped shirt. So, yeah, great product. Make sure to check them out. Manscaped.com, as I mentioned. LAFB is your promo code. But also BetOnline.Ag. If you know the show, you know the site. It's not .com, .ag. It's your gambling, wagering, casino, whatever you want to call it. No more football, but plenty of stuff to bet on with basketball, hockey. I don't know about you, but I watched, I don't know if there's any hockey fans out there. If there are, hit me up. I'm a big hockey guy. I played hockey all my life too, along with football. We had a little outdoor weekend up in Lake Tahoe. I'm an Avalanche fan. So they beat the Golden Knights after like a 9-hour delay because of the sun. But yeah, so you can bet on hockey. March Madness. I think I just joined a March Madness pool that starts in like 12 days, I want to say. March Madness might be the best playoff experience in sports. I love the Stanley Cup playoffs. Obviously, I love the NFL playoffs. College football, I enjoy bowl season. Obviously, it's huge discussion. We wish there was more playoffs, yada, yada, yada. But it's fun that they at least, there's a lot of teams involved. March Madness, though. I don't watch college basketball, at all until March Madness. So I always go to BetOnline.Ag. I bet on teams. I fill out a bracket. completely blind, but it's just a blast. It's so much fun. So BetOnline.Ag, head there today. Tell them the guys over at the LA Football Network sent you. So let's just jump right into this. I'm going to start with Rams, and then we're going to do Chargers. I'm hitting both teams. I'm going to do about 8 to 10 realistic free agency options. I'll talk about the tag too. That's going to be super quick. And then, so I'll do the Rams, and then I'll do the Chargers. So if you're a Chargers fan, if you want, go ahead and skip forward 15, 20 minutes. Or, hey, if you just want more knowledge about some of these prospects, or not prospects, but these free agents, or if you just want to know more about LA football, or you just want to hear me ramble and sip on some whiskey with me or whatever, then stick around. I'm drinking Jim Beam right now, not a part of the show. However, we got a whiskey sponsor that's jumping on board here soon that I cannot wait to announce to you guys and get you hopefully some free whiskey if we can do some giveaways. So stay tuned for that. Be excited for that. All right, Rams fans. Obviously, we all know about the cap. As of now, what I heard is as of this morning, the projected cap is about 182 to 183 million. We were originally thinking it was 175. Now we're thinking it's more 182, 183. So, I mean, that's good news, an extra 7 to 8 million to play with. So that would, as of now, according to Spotrac, I believe the Rams are a little over 30 million. That would drop them down to like 23 million over the cap. Over the cap. For those that have slept under a rock and don't know, the Rams are 22 to 30 million over what the cap's going to be. So let's just set the ground rules real quick. And this is why I like to say these are realistic options, because I see a lot of, we'll call them analysts, we'll call them Rams fans, and then there's the fanboys, if you will, that just think anything and everything is possible and it's going to happen. And I'll be honest with you, it doesn't work that way. I know we see a lot of stuff out there right now about, the cap is a myth. And to an extent, yeah, because we've seen teams able to play around the cap and do specific things and get, we've seen that, like, for instance, the Rams last year were like really bad with the cap, and they were able to make some cuts and some dead money wiggle room after the June 6th deadline, yada, yada, yada. They've still brought in a couple free agents, but the cap is still real to an extent, because otherwise you would have the NBA where you just have super teams, and the NFL doesn't have that. Every team that is a dominant dynasty, if you will, which really the only true dynasty I think we've had is the Patriots, but we've had other teams that have been very, very good for long times. They have like quarterbacks on like cheap contracts. Like Brady never made more than 15 million. So they were able to sign a bunch of guys in free agency and continue a good core around him. Mahomes, who just signed a monster deal, but he's been on his rookie deal for these last 4 years. They've been able to bring other guys in. That's why they've been so dominant. We'll see if that can withstand now in the next 4 to 5 years, because that's when Mahomes' new contract kicks in. They sign a couple other big guys, and then the rest of the roster is probably going to hurt. So I say all that, meaning that, yes, the cap is a myth. You can play around with a little bit, but the fact that I've seen quote unquote fanboys saying everyone and anyone the Rams are going to be able to get because they want to come to LA and win a Super Bowl, I see that to an extent, but Green Bay is also a very good team. They have Aaron Rodgers. They have a little more cap room. Buffalo's a very good team with Josh Allen, and they were one game away from the Super Bowl. The aforementioned Kansas City was in the Super Bowl. They have more cap than the Rams, surprisingly. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who just won a Super Bowl, there's guys that probably want to go there and not pay sales tax and play with Tom Brady. So, yes, the Rams are in a win now mode. Yes, they got Matthew Stafford. Yes, this is a very good roster that can definitely compete for a Super Bowl. I'm going to have them as my, top 5 team going in. I mean, obviously, depending what they do in free agency in the draft, but as of right now, I'd have them as a top 5 team in the NFL. But it's not like they're the team to win it and there's no one else that can compete. So when a lot of these people are saying, yeah, JJ Watt's going to come to town, these guys, because they want to come win a ship. It's like, well, yeah, but they could probably make even a little bit more and still have just as good of a chance to win a ship in Tampa, in Green Bay, in Buffalo, in KC. Even, I don't want to get that far ahead, so we'll just stick with that. So yeah, obviously I don't want to be a downer. I don't want to become the heel of Rams Twitter. That's just kind of how I feel that the Rams are in a tough spot, and they'll be able to sign some free agents, but they're not going to get all these big name guys that everyone thinks, but they can still get some really good quality players that can come and fill out this roster. But we just have to be realistic. I'm going to be be the guy that just throws realism at you. All right. That's why I've said it all the time. You know, I grew up in Denver as a Bronco fan. I think it allows me to be objective in my analysis, I hope, because I'm not just saying, yeah, they're going to win and everything and get everyone they want. Obviously, I want them to now. I've covered the team long enough to live in LA for over a decade. So I am a bit of a fan now, too. But I still have that realistic expectation. So let's get into it, shall we? So I'm going to assume, and I don't want this, but I'm going to assume John Johnson and Leonard Floyd are both gone. I just don't think they can afford either of them. Leonard Floyd, I think, is gone regardless because he'll get paid. You know, his market value is going to be, you know, $11 to $12 million, and the Rams certainly can't offer him that. And you know, he could go to a team. Yeah, is it going to be as good as opposed to playing alongside Aaron Donald? Probably not, but he could go to like a Chargers team and play alongside Joey Bosa. He could go to some other very good teams that have other pieces. Not necessarily, I know everyone compares, well, look at Dante Fowler. He fell off. Well, Dante Fowler maybe just chose a bad situation, and Leonard Floyd has other options that he could still make over 10 million, which I don't think he can make with the Rams. So he's gone. John Johnson, I know he loves it here, and maybe he would be willing to take less. I think his market value right now is around 8 to 9 million a season. Um, could be willing to make less. I think the Rams will get right now, like I said, they're about 22 to 30 million over the cap, depending where it does finally rest at. I think with restructures, they're going to probably cut some players. They'll be able to get to about 15, maybe 20. Again, this is where I've seen some, you know, people on Twitter saying like, yeah, they'll get to like 50 million. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll get to like 15, maybe 20. That's my ceiling. If they can get to 20 million in the black, that's good. I mean, that's really solid from where they are right now. That's a $40 million swing, if you will. But John Johnson is going to have to take a substantial cut. You know, if his market's 8, I think he's going to have to take 5 or 6 if he wants to stay, unless they do a super heavy back end deal where he makes 2 or 3 this year, then he's going to make like 16 or 17 in year 2 and 3, which is certainly possible. And which is why people say the cap is a myth, because you can do things like that. And if he's willing to do that, or just have a really good cash bonus this year with a really small cap hit, and then next year be one of the highest paid safeties, which is that smart for the Rams, especially considering what they've done at the safety position in the last 2 years of the draft, taking 3 guys. And you still have Nick Scott, who's a big special teamer, but he did start, not really start, but he did spot start last season and played pretty well. So love John Johnson, but I'm just going to assume in this scenario that he's gone. Told you guys, I'm already rambling. I'm probably already at like 15 minutes. So looking at safety though, because I think going into the season with John Johnson, no, excuse me, not John Johnson, going into the season with Nick Scott, with Taylor Rapp, with the 2 former rookies and Jordan Fuller and Terrell Burgess, you have 4 very solid safeties, 3 starting capable safeties, but all very young. So I think it'd be wise to get a cheap veteran, not necessarily starter. I mean, you're probably going to go into the year with Jordan Fuller and Taylor Rapp as your 2 starters. Burgess, who I'm still very high on. I know he was, you know, kind of was here and there. I thought he'd have a little more playing time early in the year, and then he got hurt, obviously. But I'm still very high on him to be a solid player on this defense after getting drafted out of Utah. Sometimes those Utah players maybe not shine in their rookie seasons, and they really come to fruition later on. So I love those 3. I just think you would want a little veteran depth. I think 4 is okay at the safety, but considering Nick Scott is such a huge special teamer, I think you might want a 5th guy just if injuries do happen. And so let's look at a few kind of veteran options that they could get for that wouldn't break the bank. So one, Tayshaun Gibson. He was with Houston 2 years ago, with the Bears last year. Finished last year with 66 tackles, 2 picks, and he only had $1,050,000 was his salary last year. So he had a little better year last year than he did in 2019, but not enough where I don't think it drives his cap up that much. So you can probably still sign him for $1.5 million, under $2 million per season, or maybe he signs another just 1-year deal. And he's a very solid veteran player. Started for the Bears last year, so he could come in here, and even if he's not the starting, he's going to come in on, you know, nickel and dime situations. Can definitely start if you have injuries, and he's not going to break the bank whatsoever. You can get him $1.5 million probably, maybe even just at the vet minimum, even if you're lucky. Will Parks is another guy that I love. You know, still, you know, played in that Fangio tree. Obviously, Brandon Staley is no longer here, but they're still going to kind of adapt the defense to what Brandon Staley created because of how successful it was. And what I love about Will Parks is he's extremely versatile. He can play in the box. He can play back as a free safety if you need him to be a center fielder. It can be too high. He can play corner if you need him to be. He played some corner for the Broncos last year when they were so injured at that position. At the end of the year, he was playing some corner. So Will Parks, again, you can get him probably around that 1.5, 2 million range. He left Denver last year to go to Philly to make more money. And for whatever reason, didn't get playing time, ended up getting waived by Philly, came back to Denver, and was settled in around that 1.5 million mark. And I think the Rams could probably get him that too, just because he had a really down year statistically. But he's still super young. I believe he's a 5th-year player. And like I said, just has that versatility as a safety, as a secondary player that I think would play great in this defense. And Raheem Morris would love to be able to move him around and do different things with him. And our secondary coach, I think, would do awesome work with him. So I'm a big Will Parks guy, and I think he could be a great asset. So either one of those, Tayshaun Gibson or Will Park, I like, just because you're not going to break the bank. They come and they add depth, but they can start if needed. So those are kind of the 3 components you're going to see a lot in this theme, in this list, is add depth, can start if needed, cheap. That's kind of what the Rams are looking for. I know everyone wants the big superstar, big name guys come win a championship, and we might get some. I'm not sitting here saying it's not happening 100%. I just don't think it's very likely. I'm a glass half full guy all the time, but when it comes to being almost 30 million over the cap in a down cap year, I'm not that glass half full on, getting in these huge name guys that they're just going to all of a sudden take, a 75% discount. I know let me say this again, there's 100% going to be veteran players to take cheaper 1-year deals because they're going to wait for the cap to go up next year, where then they can sign their like final long-term big contract. Guys like Von Miller, potentially, if the Broncos do not renegotiate, guys like JJ Watt, that will happen. But again, they can still make 10 to 12 million on a 1-year deal, whereas the Rams are going to be wanting to be like, yeah, come here for 4 to 5. Let's be real here. All right. So that was the safety position. As you'll see, a lot of this is looking at defense. I think the offense is fairly intact. Other than the receiver position and center, which we'll get to. But I think most of it, because we have so many free agents on defense, that's what we'll want to address in free agency. And then I think we can do a lot of offensive stuff in the draft. I really like attacking the receiver position in the draft. But we'll get to that in a minute. So, so we finished with safety. So now let's look at probably our other. Again, safety's not really a need. I just think you need to add a veteran piece if you are going to let John Johnson walk. So then we look at let's go inside linebacker, because this was a position that obviously all year was talked about as the weakness of this defense. But also because of how Brandon Staley ran this defense and because of the scheme, they were able to get away with it. Running with, the 2 high safeties, keeping a really light box so you didn't have a huge emphasis on those inside backers, running a lot of nickel and dime. And so they were able to get away with it, and they had guys step up. I mean, the guys that did play inside backer played fairly well. They were not, miserably poor. We could certainly upgrade it, but they're not awful. But I think this is a position we do need to address in free agency, just because in the draft, maybe you want to do other needs. If you don't get one of these guys, then we could address it in the draft. But I think these are some cheap options that could really bring a lot of versatility. Versatility could start or could just be depth. First guy I'm going to mention, Todd Davis. Was a starter for the Denver Broncos. Was a really good starter for the Denver Broncos. They extended him to a fairly large contract, him and Brandon Marshall. He played, obviously in a 3-4 defense under Vic Fangio, but he was a really good run stuffer. He's not your speediest linebacker. He's not going to get side to sideline extremely fast. Isn't great in coverage, but he's a really good, knows the football. Not going to miss tackles. He'd finished with 100 tackles every single season with the Broncos. Ended up being waived last year just because the Broncos were younger at the position with Josie Jewell and Alexander Johnson, and he had a higher cap number. So he's kind of just one of those cap casualty guys. Signed with Minnesota. Didn't play a lot because they were really strong at linebacker, so he's more of a depth piece. Is a free agent again, still fairly young. I believe he's under 30 years old. You can get him probably on the vet minimum, which again, that's the theme here. Get him for $1.5 million. And he can come in and to me, he may be one of the better linebackers on the roster immediately if he still, hasn't lost a step from what I saw 2 years ago. Again, didn't see a lot of him last year because he's more of a depth guy. But he would be, and even if he's not, he'd certainly be depth if you get those injuries like the Rams saw, in training camp and then right when the playoffs started. So certainly a guy that would be valuable, but would not cost a high value. So Todd Davis one. One that's going to cost you a little bit more, but had a fairly good year last year with the Chargers, Denzel Perryman. Again, not a great guy in pass coverage. Not your speediest sideline guy, but he sticks his head down, plugs holes, good run defender. Last year was one of the first years he was healthy for the majority of the season when other linebackers weren't for the Chargers. So he stepped up after there were some injuries there, with Drew Tranquil and other guys on that unit. So I think Perryman will be a little bit more. I think he's gonna hit you at that 4 to 7 million range. And so that might be a bit pricey for the Rams for a not necessarily immediate starter. Like he's not a guaranteed starting at that linebacker position. So that might be a little rich for where they're at. But it might not if they are able to free up more and they like what he's able to bring. And again, maybe he will be one of those guys that would, get 7 to 8 million on the open market. But if he doesn't want to move, LA, obviously the Rams are a Super Bowl contender. Maybe he'll stay here for that 4 to 5 million. So I think that's more realistic pay cut or cheaper deal scenario as opposed to the big name guys going, yeah, I could make 13 million here, which I'm worth 17 million, but I'll go play for the Rams for 5. I don't really see that happening. So Drew Tranquil and Todd Davis. So I like Todd Davis a little better. Last guy I want to throw out there, Reggie Ragland, really has been a disappointment since being drafted second round by the Buffalo Bills out of Alabama, but he's still only 28 years old. I know he was on his third team last year, being drafted by Buffalo, then got traded to the Chiefs, and then I believe he was on Detroit last year. So, has really had kind of a letdown year for the hype that he had coming out of college. But again, 28 years old. He was making just over $1 million last year, so you can get him on the cheap yet again. And why not take a chance if you're going to pay a vet minimum to a guy and he can come in and either he gives you what that worth. He's not going to play any worse than what that vet minimum is. He's not a liability necessarily, but his ceiling, from what we saw in college, his ceiling is a lot higher. So maybe you get him in here, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, look at what we found on the free agent market in the rough. So those are my 3 linebackers that I think would be, solid additions for cheap. So Todd Davis, a little pricier with Denzel Perryman, and the Reggie Ragland also cheap if you want to go barrel hunting, if you will. So last one on defense, and I forgot to mention this, but I'm assuming too. I said I assumed John Johnson and Leonard Floyd will be not back. But I am assuming that Darius Williams and Troy Hill will be back. I think they're just too important in that secondary, and you're not going to find any options that are at that market value that will fit as good as they do. Or you want to bring in, they reteach the whole scheme. I know they're going to shift a little bit with Raheem Morris now, but for what their value's worth, which, anywhere from that 3 to 6 million range per year, I think you're not going to find anyone better or at least comfortable in that same range. So unless you're going to go spend more, which would be, I think, silly of them at that position. So I think they're going to be back. So last one on defense I'm going to talk about is the edge position, because, you're losing Leonard Floyd, who was your second leading sack guy outside of Aaron Donald. You have, a lot of question marks. Samson Ebukam, he may be gone as well as a free agent. Oba Okoronkwo really, had some injuries. Started looking good there last year, but then got injured. So we don't really know exactly what we'll get this year. Terrell Lewis, obviously we know the athleticism. We loved him coming out of college. They were able to get him late mid-round because of the injury history. And the injury history reared its ugly head again. So they have to knock this out of the park, whether it's in the draft or in free agency. They have to get valuable guys that can line up and take some of the pressure off Aaron Donald, because we saw against Green Bay when Donald wasn't 100%, there was no pass rush, non-existent. Michael Brockers is one of, I think, the best DNs in the game, but that's just not his repertoire. He's not a pass rusher. He can get to the quarterback. I think he ended up having some great games, getting some sacks in there, but he's, a run stuffer, an edge setter. He does different things in his repertoire that's not necessarily rushing the quarterback. So they have to get this. They have to get this right, and they did that last year when they brought Floyd in for a 1-year deal, but still paid him $10 million, and I don't think that they're going to be able to pay an edge rusher $10 million this year. I really don't. But here are some guys that could get for fairly cheap that can play well. I think. First one, this is more of a, I don't want to call it a pipe dream because he really hasn't played that well the last 2 years. He's just a name now. But Jadeveon Clowney is a guy that maybe playing alongside Aaron Donald can rejuvenate his career. His market value right now, according to Spotrac, is about $6.5 million. I think the Rams can afford that if they get to that 20 million positive threshold. $6.5 million. I know last year he held out during free agency because he was asking for 20. So that might be a huge. I know Spotrac set that market. I don't know if he believes that, but that's what it set. That's how he played. He really was really non-existent for the Titans last year. And with the Seahawks the year before that, I know he was a body that teams ran away from, but he finished with like 3 sacks. And so we want a guy that gets sack production, not a guy that's just, again, you're playing with Aaron Donald, you're automatically going to get more sacks. That helps. But yeah, so I think if they can get him for 5.5, 6.5, even 7 million, then it's a no-brainer. Has had a down 2 years, but it still has the talent, still has the scare factor, if you will, the fear factor. And at 7 million or less, why not take a swing? Why not? Right? So that's one. Next one I got, and this is an interesting one. Solomon Thomas, San Francisco 49er. Injured last year, missed the entire season. Other than what he got injured in the first game, second game, I think. Year before that, really not super productive, and he finished with 2 sacks. His market value right now is about 5.5 million. Former 3rd overall pick. Now, I don't know if he would fit in this scheme. So let me just say that. Played in a 4-3 with the Niners. So would he, if he came to the Rams, I'm not sure if he would be a 3-4 D end or a 3-4 stand-up outside linebacker. Obviously, they're not going to want to drop him in coverage much. But he has the body to be a stand-up edge defender if needed. And I think, coordinators nowadays are good at adjusting. It's not like, hey, okay, this is my scheme. You play this or we fail kind of thing. So I think Raheem Morris would be able to find a way to utilize him. So again, though, not great production so far in the NFL, but we're riding that wave of potential. 3rd overall pick, coming off of injury, so we can get him a lot cheaper than probably if he played. Even if he had a down year last year, if he didn't get injured and played the whole year, market value just because of where he was drafted would probably be in that 10 million range. So the fact that it's cut in half at 5.5, again, why not swing for the fences? If you fail, you're out. Don't sign him to some crazy deal, but say you do a 3-year, $16 million deal. Or if he wants to just do that 1-year deal and then try to have a big year, then sign elsewhere, but why not take a swing? And you steal someone from the Niners as you start depleting that defensive line as DeForest Buckner's gone now. Solomon Thomas could be gone. So we start hopefully ending that dominant defensive line, or at least depleting it a little bit. I know they got Kinlaw last year as well, but we can, start taking it away a little by little. So yeah, Solomon Thomas, I think it's an interesting choice. Only 28 years old. Oh no. Last one on edge, I have Jeremiah Tachu, former Chargers 2nd round pick. Found a spot with the Broncos where he had some success. Started because of the Von Miller injury last year. Him and Malik Reed kind of split starting reps out alongside Bradley Chubb. So I played well. He's not your flashy superstar pass rusher, but again, the Aaron Donald factors is hard to really evaluate because he's automatically going to elevate whoever plays alongside him. But, Atachu has finished the last 2 years, I think, with 7+ sacks with the Broncos. He might have finished with double-digit last year, actually, if I'm not mistaken. So very solid year. Made $1.5 million last year. Can probably make in that 5 to 6 million range this year, maybe less, depending how the market looks. Because that's the big thing, too. We see these market values, but how true are those going to be with every team being, under the cap, or every team having the cap lower. So it's not like the Rams are just like 30 million over and every team has 70 million to play with. Every team is, a little tighter than they have in years past. So who knows how true that market value is. So Jeremiah Tacho, another good option. That would probably be, I think all three of these guys are going to be around that same value. I think Itachi might be a little less, just he doesn't have the name shock and awe of Clowney and Thomas, which sometimes does hold clout for you. But yeah, so those are, I listed probably more than necessary, Rams fans. Those are just some really realistic options. I know he went heavy defense. Offensive wise, I really think Austin Blythe, they need to just re-sign. I think he made just under $4 million this year. They could probably re-sign him for around that, maybe even a little less, maybe a little more, but not. I wouldn't think any more than 5. And I don't think you're going to find anyone around that value or even a few million more that can come in and play better, if that makes sense. You have your established offensive line that improved exponentially from 2019 to 2020, from 31st overall to 3rd, according to Pro Football Focus. ESPN rankings, though, had them ranked in the top 10 as well for almost every category. So huge improvement. Sometimes offensive line is all just about continuity, and to bring in someone, say you have to re-sign Blythe to a $5 million deal, and you bring in someone else for $7 million. Is that really going to be a huge increase? Yeah, you have guys like Green Bay center you could bring in, but that's going to cost you 12 to 13 million. And they can't afford that at center. So either you bring Blythe back. I think that I think is my number one choice. Bring Blythe back because you don't mess up the continuity. If you don't bring him back, I honestly think you roll with Austin Corbett, who's played center. You have Bobby Evans and David Edwards at guard. And then you have Whitworth and Havenstein. I know people have talked about Havenstein as a potential trade or cut candidate. If that happens, obviously the scenario changes. But as of now, that's what you roll with. You have, Tremon Ainsham, who gives you some depth. Joseph Noteboom, who gives you depth. And then you draft a center. I know there's a lot of good centers in the draft, which I will be diving into a lot more. I could list them, but I don't want to analyze because I haven't really, me personally, I haven't dove into my draft stuff. I'm kind of focusing more on free agency right now, but then you draft one and then you let him sit maybe a year behind Corbett, and then he can maybe take the reins in year 2 or 3. So Blythe would be my first choice to re-sign. If not, don't sign a new one. Don't spend money at that position. Roll with Austin Corbett. Keep the guys you have intact, because I just think that continuity is really, really important. And they showed that. This was a good offensive line, guys. This Rams offensive line was a good offensive line. So you keep it intact, love it. If Blythe does command too much, maybe he's gonna get $7 million on the open market, perhaps. Then roll with Corbett. Slide Bobby Evans over to guard like he played against the Packers. Didn't necessarily play great at left guard, but he can obviously do it. David Edwards played good at guard all season long before he got hurt. And then, you roll with your 2 tackles, obviously, in Havenstein and Whitworth. So receiver, I've talked about it before. I really want to see them do it in the draft, but if they do sign a guy, I like a guy like John Ross. Obviously, we need deep threat guys, right? Everyone knows that. That's the number one option for the Rams, deep threat. I know Marvin Jones is the big linked, white buffalo, if you will, for the Rams. I would obviously love it. Would love to get him. Unless he really takes a big pay cut to come play with Stafford and in LA, I just think he'll get offered more on the open market, even with the lower cap. Even if the Rams are able to free up enough, do they want to spend $8-9 million on a deep receiver? He's not necessarily a speed threat, but he can stretch the field. And obviously, he's a high point guy that can go get jump balls, who the Rams don't have. So the Rams, you say you need a jump threat guy, and you also need a deep speed guy. So he would be like your jump ball corner post. Also just, a guy that, Stafford can just chuck it up to and he goes and gets it. So I'm not denying I would love to have him. Is it worth $8-9 million though? If he'll come for 5 on a 1-year deal or a super heavy back in a deal and play, on 4 to 5 in this first season with cash options. Yeah, love it. Absolutely. I don't want to get misconstrued that I don't want Marvin Jones. I do. I just don't think it's that realistic unless they do a super heavy back end deal or he does just take a big pay cut to come play with Stafford here in LA, which can happen. Guys like John Ross, though, who 9th overall pick, has had injuries, really hasn't had a good career with the Bengals. Could be looking for a cheap 1-year deal or even sign a cheap 3-year deal so he can cash out on this next one, come prove himself. Why not take that risk? Home run hitter can burn it. Deshaun Jackson, I've seen, he played at Long Beach Poly. This would be a homecoming for him. How much does he really have left? He's been kind of injury prone. I feel like the last 3 years, he'll have one blow up game where it's like D-Jax, there he is. And then he kind of tapers off the rest of the season. So, definitely an option. It's not my first choice, but again, if you get him for the vet minimum, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I just think John Ross is a better option right now, being he's under 30. He wants to prove himself because of being such a high draft pick. Doesn't want to go in that bust category. You can get him for cheap, and you really don't need him to do a whole. You need him to catch 30 balls a year. Stretch the field, catch 30 balls a year. That's all you need. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, your possession guys. Van Jefferson's going to have a bigger role. I want to see the tight ends get a lot more involved this season because Tyler Higbee, I think, was really good in 2019, the last half of the season. And then this year was really good the first half of the season. And then they went away completely from the tight ends. So we'll see if we can get into that. And yeah, I think I hit on a lot more than I planned. I plan on talking about 8 guys. I think I talked on a lot more. Last one I want to say, because I think Gerald Everett potentially will be gone. Tight end. Love me some General Electric. I know. He was a guy every year where I was like, oh, it's going to be his breakout year. And he just never really broke out. But still, provided some great highlights, had some great games, that Kansas City Monday night game in particular. So, if they can get him back, great. I think he can get some decent money for some other teams. So one guy that I had circled, Jake Butt. I don't know if you guys know him. He was a superstar tight end with Michigan, and in their bowl game, I believe it was the Orange Bowl, tore his ACL. So then his draft stock, the Broncos ended up drafting him in the 5th round. And then after missed his rookie year, basically recovering from that torn ACL, his second year training camp tears his other ACL. So then he misses the whole year. Last year, had some injuries, bumps and bruises. So huge injury guy. But you get him for super cheap, and the talent's there. He can block and he can catch passes. You can bring him in for $800,000, $900,000. Could be worth giving a shot to play alongside, because obviously you have Higbee, you have Bryson Hopkins, who they're extremely excited about after the draft last year, who's going to be another similar to a Gerald Everett, a more receiver-friendly tight end as opposed to blocking tight end. And then Jake Butt could come in and be, a guy that, is a depth guy that can really get his legs under him. So, a guy maybe you take a shot on if you have some extra cash laying around. So, yeah, I think there you have it. I think that's a good, realistic list for the Rams. We'll see if they sign any of them. We'll see if I know what I'm talking about. But I think some of those names could really fill out the roster really good, and they could do it for cheap. Because, like I said, if they get to that 15 to 20 million back in the black, have some good spending money, and they can get probably one of the guys I listed at each of the positions I listed. So, as opposed to some of the other stuff I'm seeing out there where you're the one person that everyone's like, oh, it's going to cost their full cap. And you have a lot of other positions of need to fill. You want to add depth. The Rams were healthy all year long and then got hurt right when it mattered most in the playoffs. Had all of these injuries, and obviously it cost him. So you want to have that depth built out to sustain a deep playoff run. And this could be it. And obviously we have the draft to come, potentially 2 or 3 third-round picks, which will help a lot as well. So, which we'll get into later. So yeah, let me know what you think, Rams fans. That is my realistic list of potential free agent targets for your LA Rams. So hit me up on Twitter, Ryan Dyrud, LAFB. Love your thoughts. If you think I'm full of crap, if you think, yeah, I like some of those guys, let me know. If you just want to say what up, Ryan Dyrud, LAFB on Twitter. All right, but before we get into the Chargers portion of our realistic free agency options on this episode of the LA Football Podcast, let's give a brief shout out to our newest sponsor, eBay. Excited to talk about this. This is a great sponsor. I'll be honest with you guys, I haven't used eBay in forever. I think Amazon is everything nowadays. eBay's alive and kicking, and especially if you're a sneakerhead. I know there's a lot of you out there. Personally, I'm not a huge one, but Frostee is. We talked about it last show. If you're a sneakerhead, you got to head to ebay.com/sneakers. Whether it's rare dead stock or the latest release, find the exact shoe you're looking for. As the original sneaker marketplace, eBay is the place to go to cop the pair you've been eyeing. eBay's authenticity guarantees your sneakers are meticulously inspected by independent professional authenticators. And for the sneaker sellers out there, eBay has eliminated selling fees on sneakers $100 and up, making it free to sell or flip your collection. So you can head to ebay.com/sneakers. You can buy a pair, whatever you're into, new Jordans, Vans, Chucks, Yeezys. I'm not a huge shoe guy, but hey, I know there's a lot of awesome ones out there. Buy a pair, flip them on eBay, and there's no fee, no selling fee to do that if it's over $100. Which, if you're buying the Jordans and the Yeezys, I'm pretty sure they're well over that. So, go to ebay.com/sneakers today. That's ebay.com/sneakers. The world's best destination for discovering great value and unique selection. All right, thanks to eBay. Check it out, guys. Helps us out as well, and get yourself a fresh new pair of kicks. Why not? Yeah, so Chargers portion now of our free agency realistic options. Chargers have a lot more to play with. Let's say they're about 30 million over the cap or under the cap. I think I was saying over for the Rams, so let's say under the cap. They have 30 million to spend as is, and that's, they could restructure some things. They could obviously gain more from that too. Most likely, knowing Tom Telesco, it'll probably still sit right around there once the free agency and once the new league year starts on March 19th. The biggest question for them, and I didn't really talk about it with the Rams, is the franchise tag, which became available just today on Tuesday. And they have until, I believe, March 9th to implement the tag. And a lot of teams will implement the tag, just ensuring that whatever player they do doesn't hit free agency, and then they'll actually work out a long-term deal during that time, which I think they have until July 15th then to do a long-term deal. But it just ensures that player doesn't hit free agency and other teams can offer. So just because a team gives a franchise tag doesn't necessarily always mean that player will be under the tag when the season starts. It just gives them more options, more time to come to a long-term deal. So the Rams, I don't think they'll use a tag. Just I don't think they have the money. Anyone you're tagging, you're paying them the premium. So if they were to tag John Johnson, Leonard Floyd, you're paying them the premium at their market value, and they just don't have that kind of money. Chargers, on the other hand, could do it, and really the only player worth tagging would be Hunter Henry, who would be on his second tag, which puts him around 12 to 13 million. If they were to tag him there, if they sent him long term, he'd probably garner close to that anyway. I don't think Hunter Henry is quite in that upper echelon with like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, even Zach Ertz. I think he's a little bit below that, not because he can't be, he just hasn't really been healthy enough to put the numbers up. This last year, he was, I'm going to say fully healthy. He missed the last game or so, 2 games, I believe, with COVID. I'm not going to call that an injury issue. So it was his first true season of being fully healthy. And we saw how important he was to this offense, how important he was to Justin Herbert as, an outlet and a safety valve. And so I think he is very, very important to bring back. Is he worth, 13, 14, 15 million? That's hard to say. I think the tight end position has such a big drop off in the NFL. You have like the aforementioned guys that I already said. You have Hunter Henry, and then you have kind of new and up and coming. You have Noah Fant in Denver, who I think is going to be very, very good. TJ Hawkinson has shown flashes in Detroit and then shown games he disappears. Dallas Goedert, also in Philly, is a very good tight end. There's others, obviously, I'm not mentioning, but I think there's a big drop off from like your top 3 or 4. Then you have Hunter Henry, and then you have like the up and coming younger guys or just like vets that take up space. So you would be, if you let Hunter Henry walk, and let me just say this, the Chargers absolutely 100% should not use their first round pick on a tight end. I know Kyle Pitts is a name that a lot of people have linked them to, and mock drafts have him too. Whatever happens in this free agency, unless they literally sign, which I'll get to, unless they literally sign like 7 offensive linemen, then maybe they can do Kyle Pitts at 13. I'd be okay with that then. But as it stands, that is not what I'm looking for them to do. So you either get Hunter Henry, franchise tagged, try to get him long term. I think he's worth it. I just think he's that important to the offense. I think he's that important to continuing Justin Herbert's development. And what he brings is a stability. And as we saw him healthy, he was just a huge facet of the offense. And so if he can build on this healthy season and continue it, then he can become one of those top 3 tight ends in the game. He absolutely has a talent, 100%. So for him, it's all been about health. And so coming off a year where he was fully healthy, again, not counting the 2 COVID games, that's not quote unquote injury. So yeah, if, however, they do decide not to even franchise him, not extend him, they just let him walk. Some free agents that they could go after. Jonnu Smith is a very talented tight end out of Tennessee, 25 years old, had 41 receptions, 8 touchdowns last year. Market value is around $8 million. So a probably talent and production drop off from Henry a little bit, but you're also potentially saving 5 to 6 million, depending what you do long term. But his yearly value is around 8 million, and he's a very good tight end. Hasn't really had that many health concerns. Was very involved in the Tennessee offense. So if they were to move on, I wouldn't hate that decision if they get Jonnu Smith. Now Tennessee could tag Jonnu Smith, and then all this is moot, obviously. But if they don't tag him and he does hit free agency, and the Chargers hadn't tagged Hunter Henry, then that is a cheaper option, and someone could come in and actually be a very valuable and a very underrated signing. Probably one of the most underrated signings in the NFL if they could pull that off. The only other tight end really I would even like go after, and if not, then I would just wait for the draft, would be Gerald Everett, just because, he's in LA. Brandon Staley knows him from being with the Rams for a year. I thought he underperformed overall after being a 2nd-round pick. Super talented. I remember when he was a rookie, seeing him at training camp. I was at training camp down in Irvine, his rookie season, and seeing him on 7-on-7, 11-on-11, running routes over the middle. And he was just leaps and bounds athletically gifted above his competition, whether it was a secondary, whether it was the other tight ends, whether it was receivers. I remember just sitting there and watching and be like, damn, this guy is going to be legit. And unfortunately, just never really lived up to that. There was games where he showed great. I was talking in the Rams segment. Obviously, that Kansas City game is one that always comes to mind, with his 2 touchdowns. And it was the game clincher, obviously, down the sideline from Jared Goff. But he was never consistent. And maybe that was him. Maybe that was, Sean McVay and play calling. Maybe that was Jared Goff. There's obviously a lot of factors. I think part of it was with him was, I don't want to say work ethic, but it seemed like every play wasn't always 100% effort on every single play. Not by any means saying he's lazy. That's just maybe he knew, okay, on this route, I'm the 4th option, so I'm not really going to give it my all. And I don't know if that came back to haunt him or what. Or we never really heard any issues with him and the staff or anything like that, but that could have been why he had games where he'd have like 3 games in a row with 1 catch or less, and then he'd have like a game with like 9 catches and go off for 120 yards. So the talent's there. Again, I'm just saying they could get him for fairly cheap, probably 4 to 5 million a year, if they decide not to retain Hunter Henry. So that's the tight end position. I think Hunter Henry should be a no-brain tag and then extend. You don't want to play with him under the tag the 2nd time, but hopefully they tag him and then can extend him long-term before July 15th. I think that's what they should do. All right, so the prize possession, or the white buffalo, if you will, for this Chargers team during this free agency period has to be John Johnson. I mean, it's a no-brainer in the sense that it's a perfect fit with Brandon Staley. He literally ran the defense for Staley. He was the quarterback of the defense last season for the Rams. Obviously, there's a trust factor there. Right now, his market value is around 8 to 9 million. So, he's going to cost you some, but it's not like they can't afford it with that 30 million, cap space they have currently. I think he's a top 10 safety overall, period, free safety and strong safety. I think it'd be really hard to say he's not top 15. I don't think many people could argue that he's within the top 15. And then you combine that with coupling John Johnson with Derwin James, and you now have most likely the best, most dominant back end of any defense in the NFL, combined with the great defensive mind that is Brandon Staley, combined with the phenomenal defensive back coach that is Ronaldo Hill, that is now your defensive coordinator. So it's a move that would be maybe a splurge in the world of Tom Telesco from what we've seen. But last year we saw him splurge a little in free agency that we haven't seen in a long time. And it would be a splurge that would be a huge benefit. John Johnson, not in no injury history, nicked up here and there, but really no injury history. I think he missed one. Trying to just, I don't have it in front of me, but it was 1 year he did miss significant time. But overall, his career, not injury history. So yeah, it's a big thing for the Chargers. Don't go after injury-prone guys. And then, like I said, if him and Derwin James are on the field at the same time, has to be the most terrifying unit because, either one of them, I think technically both of them are strong safeties, but either one can play, or both are free. Either one can play strong. Either one can play free. Very interchangeable. Both, Brandon Staley likes to play a lot of too high, so they'll both be back there, but both can play in the box. I think Derwin's better in the box than John, and John is better playing that, center fielder. So I think they complement each other beautifully. But in the unfortunate future, if Derwin does get injured again, unfortunately, I hate to say that, and I don't want to jinx anything. Let's knock on wood. But at least then you would still have Nasir Adderley. If they bring back Rayshawn Jenkins on a cheap contract, you would still have depth there. But then you have John Johnson, who's a leader, who's led a defense before, who knows Brandon Staley's defense. And so you're not like losing Derwin James and all of a sudden it's a huge drop off. You still have a very good back end leader with John Johnson. And then you just hope Derwin stays healthy. And it's like, that's an elite unit. Good luck throwing it deep on those guys. Good luck running the box when you're playing nickel and dime. So that's the White Buffalo. That to me, that is the no-brainer. If the Chargers sign one guy in free agency, it's John Johnson. I know we're going to get to the offensive line because that's the biggest issue for the Chargers overall. But if there's one big name guy, I'm not saying like if they only sign one free agent, do that. Like obviously, the offensive line has the entire offensive line is basically a free agent, and it was the biggest issue overall. And they could overcome safety stuff if they don't get John Johnson. But I'm just saying if there's one big name target, he'd be my big name target. Okay. Got that all out there. Now let's get to the offensive line because this is undoubtedly the most important unit for this Charger team going forward. Obviously, the fact that you need to protect Justin Herbert. Obviously, the fact you really need to get the run game consistent. And obviously, just the fact that they were the worst or second worst unit in the entire NFL. And then you talk on top of that, almost every single one of them is going to be a free agent. So you literally have like 3 guys rostered right now, or once the new league year starts on March 15th. So I'm not going to go into who to bring back because we could talk all day about, okay, do they bring Tevye back? Do they bring Forrest Lamb back? Dan Feeney back? I'm just going to talk about a few guys that I think they should sign. Obviously, the draft, I think they need to heavily go at offensive line. I think pick 13 has to be an offensive lineman unless they literally trade for Orlando Brown and get all of these top name, free agent offensive linemen as well. Then maybe they can address their needs, but I still think it's a smart move to go get a young offensive lineman at 13. But anyway, we'll get more draft stuff later. So won't get into who to re-sign. Let's just look at some of these guys I think are realistic options that can be immediate upgrades on the offensive line. Let's start first with Larry Warford from the Saints. Still young, 29 years, opted out of last year. And they had drafted, Cesar Ruiz out of Michigan as well. So he was seen to be kind of expendable, if you will, but still very talented, very good offensive line that could play center or guard. And I think he would be an immediate upgrade for the Chargers. And, didn't play last year. So there's the concern of, well, is there rust from not playing last year? But then there's also you're not in the trenches pounding your head, against steel for 16 games plus playoffs. You were just resting, rehabbing, recuperating, so he could be super fresh. So it depends what side of the coin you want to argue. either way, Warford's a very good player. It's played in Pro Bowl games for the Saints, and I think it'd be a huge upgrade for this Chargers team. Darrell Williams is another tackle for the Bills. Market value set right now about 7.8 to 8 million a year. He's a very good tackle. Played in an offense, obviously, for Brian Dable, who a lot of Chargers fans wanted as the head coach of the Chargers. But I'm not saying they will play an offense similar to what the Chargers run, but he was a tackle for a quarterback with a similar skill set that Justin Herbert has. So I think that's important. It's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but you see some offensive linemen go into free agency as like a top, I keep wanting to say prospect, but as a top free agent, if you will. And let's just say they were a guard or a tackle for Tom Brady or Ben Roethlisberger or a statuesque like quarterback, but they're considered on the market as like a top offensive lineman at their position. Well, then they go sign with a team like the Seahawks, who have Russell Wilson, the Texans, who have Deshaun Watson, a mobile quarterback. And all of a sudden, I'm not saying they get exposed, but it's just they're used to blocking a certain way where they're not used to the quarterback, scrambling, running, doing this. And then they're not seen as like a highly touted free agent anymore. Or they're not free agent, but you know what I'm getting at. They're not seen as good as they were at their previous stop. But a lot of, offensive line play is just due to what your quarterback is doing. Because sometimes you'll be blocking and your quarterback may run right into where you're pushing him outside and your quarterback drops his shoulder, scrambles the outside and goes right into the defensive end that you're pushing out because you're expecting the quarterback to step into the pocket. But a lot of scrambling quarterbacks don't do that. They flee out. So I'm just saying, I think it's important for looking at free agents if you can find guys that were offensive linemen for similar skill set quarterbacks. I think that benefits Justin Herbert. So a guy like Darrell Williams, who was a tackle in Buffalo for Josh Allen, I think would fit great here in LA. And that's a very fair market value at about $8 million. Be a huge upgrade at tackle, whether he plays right or left. Obviously, Brian Bulaga is slated as the right tackle. But I think he can play both sides. But if you want to move him to the left, and if Brian Bulaga can be healthy this year, all of a sudden you have a very solid tackle tandem right there. Boom. Just like that upgrade. And then you either take like Elijah Vera Tucker out of USC at 13, who can play tackle or guard. If you were to sign Williams, you could probably then play Tucker at guard. And you all of a sudden right there have three very good offensive linemen. And we'll see what they do with Trey Turner, who a lot of people want released. I'm more on the fence that I think he had a really bad injury-riddled year, and he can rebound from that. Now, is he worth over $11 million after that bad year? That's hard to say. I would not be upset if they were to cut ties with him and go after someone else, but I also wouldn't be upset if we were to keep him and say, hey, this guy's been in the Pro Bowl 4 to 5 times. He was injured a lot, could never get his legs under him. Just didn't really feel comfortable in the trenches. So that'll be something we'll obviously monitor and keep. But just if you get, Darrell Williams, you draft Elijah Vera Tucker at 13, and then you have Brian Bulaga. Those are three solid linemen that now you have a foundation to build on. And, we'll get into more. Cam Robinson. This is an interesting prospect because the year he was drafted, it was kind of it was Garrett Bowles, Ryan Ramczyk, and Cam Robinson were seen as the top 3 tackles. And for the first 3 years of their career, Ryan Ramczyk moved over to right tackle for the Saints and played extremely well. Has been considered one of the top young tackles in the game since he came out of Wisconsin. Considered very, very good. Garrett Bowles had a lot of struggles out of Utah. Was known for, holding penalties. Still was talented. Was still a mauler. I always thought could be a very good tackle. Just struggled with some fundamentals because, he only played 1 year of Big 5 power football. And only played like 3 years total of college ball. So it was just raw. And then we saw last year him play at an all-pro level. I thought he was one of the best. I think he graded out as the second best left tackle in the entire NFL. Cam Robinson came in very polished, if you will, but just the pro game, he didn't quite live up, I think. I mean, he still started, still played decent. I think Pro Football Focus graded him pretty harshly a lot. I think there was years where he was in like the 40s or whatnot. I don't have it in front of me or looking at it, but he hasn't been a good tackle. He's been okay. But again, if you listen to the last segment, if you can get a guy under the market value that has a high ceiling, it might be worth taking a shot. Now, right now, his value is set at 11 million or so by Spotrac. I don't think he's worth that. I think the Chargers can get him for less than that. If they can get him for 7 to 8 million, then yeah, I would take a chance on it. Swing the bat. If you miss, it's a bummer. But why not swing for the fences and take a shot? Again, I would much rather have a guy like Darrell Williams out of Buffalo, who you could probably get cheaper still. But Cam Robinson does have the ability to be a good tackle in this league. Still 25 years old, still very young. You get him with Frank Smith, the new offensive line coach. As long as he shows a passion for the game, a heart to learn, to be a student of the game, I think he can turn that career into the projection that he was thought to be when he was drafted. So, Cam Robinson, I wouldn't put him on the top of my list for free agency, but at least when I want to mention, because he could be a bigger name where you're like, oh, wow, they got him for a good price. They could come to fruition. So sticking with tackles, and this one I'm leery on, but I at least want to say it. Zach Banner, USC prospect, um, most recently with Pittsburgh, huge human being. Really talented guy, and was going into this year as the starting right tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have been known to have really good offensive lines for a long time. Tore his ACL, missed all the season, put on the IR. So I'm hesitant with this because as a Chargers fan out there, the stigma of the Chargers and injuries. So it would probably be very unwise of them to sign a guy that you're thinking, hey, this guy talent-wise would upgrade our offensive line, but has injury history. Probably not smart of Tom Telesco to do. However, I'm just going to say this. If they can get him on the cheap, last year his contract was around 1 to 2 million. Missed the whole season, so I would not expect him to make more than that. I would think it'd be vet minimum, 1 to 2 million. That risk I want to take. I know the injuries are frustrating, but if you shell out $1 million for a guy and he pans out like the talent he really is, it'd be a homecoming for him. So maybe he'd really take a sweetheart deal to come back to LA. I think you take a shot. The problem is if you go after guys that have injury history and you're paying them top dollar, if you're paying them double-digit million a year and they have an injury history, that's where a problem arises. If you're going to give 1 to 2 million to a guy that say, hey, if you come in and you end up starting for us, this was a home run free agent signing. If you end up being a backup, a depth piece, still worth it. If you start and get injured, okay, we're not out that much. We didn't give up that much. So Zach Banner one, I know there's concern with injury, but if they can get him on the cheap, which I think they could, I think it'd be worth it. Last offensive lineman I want to talk about is going to be Denzel Good, who played for the Raiders. Anytime you can steal someone from a division rival, you want to do it, right? Why not? Denzel Good isn't a guy that he's not a big name guy. Didn't start really at all till last season just because the Raiders had injuries. He ended up starting, but he played very well. He's very versatile. Kind of played everywhere on the offensive line for the Vegas Raiders. There's the continuity with Frank Smith, who is the new offensive line coach, who I know wasn't the offensive line coach of the Raiders. He was the tight end coach, but there's still the knowledge there, the continuity there. They know each other, and there could be a good fit there. So I think that could definitely be a solid signing. Again, another fairly cheap option. He probably raised his market value based on last year coming in as a backup and him starting most of the season. But I think they can still get him for a fairly decent price. So those are my kind of offensive line fixes. I still want to see the Chargers address the offensive line in the draft. That's not for this episode. We will get more into that later. Plenty of stuff on the draft at LAFBnetwork.com. But yeah, let me know what you think, because I know this is the most important position. I'm going to just call it position. I know it's a group, but position for the Chargers this offseason is that offensive line. Yes, we want to see them upgrade skill positions. Yes, we need to see them upgrade the defense more. But the most important is the offensive line. Protect Justin Herbert at all costs. Okay. Before I wrap up, though, I do want to talk about some edge guys because most likely going to be losing Melvin Ingram. I don't think they'll bring him back at his age, over 30. I think his value is still over 10 million, even though he was injured most of last year, didn't record a single sack. I just think what he's done throughout his career as a vet, he'll still get close to that double digit. I mean, unless, maybe the market shrinks because of everything going on. And he's a guy that, we saw last year with Shelby Harris, who had a really good 2019 campaign. His market value, according to Spotrac going into last offseason, was 12 to 13 million. The Broncos were able to re-sign him for 1.3 million. So you never know. Sometimes the market value you think is one thing and it just shrinks because there's so many players at that position. And I think edge is one of those positions where we could see that happen for sure. There's a lot of talented edge guys on the free agent market this free agency period. And so he could be one that ends up falling in line because of that injury history. And maybe the Chargers get him back for cheap. I think they're going to go a different direction. You still have Uchenna Nwosu, who is very talented. Has he shown enough to be a full-time starter? I don't know. But I think we can get some cheap options here, Chargers fans, that can really benefit this team. So let's start first with older vet Justin Houston. Wasn't with the obviously with the Chiefs last year, but longtime Kansas City Chief. Was with the Colts last year and still was very efficient. A lot of pressures, a lot of QB hits. Obviously sacks. So I mean, he's above 30. So it'd be weird to see the Chargers not bring back Melvin Ingram and sign another guy the same age in Justin Houston, but wasn't injured. Has had a very, very efficient career. So I would not mind that signing depending on his value, depending on where they could get him in. So Justin Houston, I just want to throw it out there. Let's start with three higher price guys, and then we'll finish with, lower price that could come in and I think surprise people. So let's start first. Carl Lawson, I think would be a slam dunk. Defensive end from Cincinnati. Market value is about $8.89 million per year. So a little pricey, but definitely affordable for what the Chargers can do. Has had a good career so far in Cincinnati. Like I said, plays a 4-3 D end. But I've talked about Staley extensively on this podcast. I've been guessing other podcasts. I don't think it matters what a guy played in the past. I think he'll make him fit into any situation and make him fit into his schemes. So Carl Lawson's just a great talent, a great pass rusher, and I think Brandon Staley would use him in a correct way to utilize his skill set. And if they can get him in there in that 9 million or so range, I think it'd be a good signing. You pair that anyone with Joey Bosa, and they're gonna put up probably better numbers than they had before. But you pair a guy like Carl Lawson, he's a talented young player who would be a fearsome duo, because Melvin Ingram has been great, getting up there in age and obviously being injured. Now you bring in a guy who's the same age as Joey Bosa, essentially, not as talented and not as good of an edge rusher, but one tier below, still very good. So I like Carl Lawson a lot. Next up, so these are two guys that are very talented, but have not lived up to the hype. So we can play that, hopefully, and get their price down just a smidge. Had to wet the whistle there. Get the voice all dry when you're the only one talking. So Vic Beasley. I don't know how people feel about Vic Beasley, but he's an interesting player in his career because he had some years with the Falcons where you're like, okay, that's one of the elite pass rushers in the game. And then he had some years and games where non-existent, just nowhere to be found. So you don't really know what Vic Beasley you're going to get. He was with the Vegas Knights. That's the hockey team, but he was with the Vegas Raiders last year. And I honestly almost forgot he was even there. Didn't do much there. It was a signing when they got him. I was like, oh, that's a good signing for the Raiders. They got him for pretty cheap, I'm pretty sure. And I thought he could add to their pass rush that was non-existent the year before, and with Max Crosby and be a good solidified pass rusher. And it really never came to fruition. So I'm saying all the negatives, but I think what we've seen with what Brandon Staley did with the Rams is taking players that have talent. Once you're in the NFL, they all have talent. It's about utilizing that talent. So we saw Brandon Staley take the talent of a guy like Leonard Floyd, and when he was able to play alongside a guy like Aaron Donald, had a career year. So bring a guy like Vic Beasley, who obviously has talent. Maybe it's motor, maybe it's work ethic, maybe it's, practice acumen, maybe it's philosophy, whatever it may be. Brandon Staley, I think, can get that out of him, and you pair that with Joey Bosa, and we could see Vic Beasley have a career year in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Market value is about $7 million. I think that's a decent price. They could probably even get him for cheaper, especially in this offseason where a lot of players are going to take a little less to take 1-2 year short-term contracts to show out and then pay off later. And if guy, after seeing what Brandon Staley did with specific players last season with the Rams, I think Vic Beasley could be one of those guys saying, you know what, I'm going to go to LA. I'm going to play for Staley. I'm going to show out, get 12, 13 sacks, play a year or two, and then maybe I'll go sign one final big contract. Because I think he's at 29 years old, sign until he's 31, have 2 good seasons, and he could go sign elsewhere for big money. But I think that's a solid signing. Other one, again, shocking. He was with the Raiders. Totally forgot. Tack McKinley, another guy, I believe came from Atlanta as well. Atlanta had Vic Beasley and Tack McKinley, and then the Vegas had them together. Non-existent, essentially. Totally forgot Tack was there. McKinley was such a phenomenal pass rusher at UCLA. Really good pass rusher. Had a great story. Remember when he was drafted by the Falcons, he had that portrait of his grandma. Was just so stoked to be in the NFL, and it just never really happened so far. But he's 25 years old. 25 years old. That's what's always so crazy when you look at, certain free agents and you see guys that, didn't quite or are not panning out, and guys want to all of a sudden label them as a bust. Like, the dude's 25 years old. Maybe he just needs a better situation, a fresh start. And what better situation than to come home, being a UCLA prospect, come back to LA, play for a guy like I'm not going to repeat the whole thing, play for a guy in Brandon Staley, who we've seen get phenomenal production out of guys that had down years prior. Leonard Floyd, Darius Williams, Troy Hill, Troy Reeder. I can go on and on and on. Morgan Fox. So a player with the talent that Tack McKinley has, if the Chargers can get him, Spotrac says his market value is $8.4 million. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think there's no way in hell. I think his market value is $4 to $5 million. If the Chargers can get Tack McKinley for $45 million, you have Tack, Uchenna Nwosu, Joey Bosa. You have a very formidable. I mean, you could maybe even get 2 of these guys with their cat. You could get Vic Beasley and Tack. Carl Lawson, I don't know if you can get one of those 2 guys and Carl. I think it's Carl Lawson by himself. But either of those 3, I like where the ball gets rolling. I'm trying to convince you guys. Hopefully, how are you feeling? Hit me up. What are we feeling? Hit me up on Twitter, Ryan Dyrud, LAFB. Final 2 guys, and this is my final 2 of the whole free agency for the Chargers. I know I didn't go into receivers. I just think they could do more in the draft with the receiver. I know I said with the Rams too. But I think they have a good core. Again, this is assuming Mike Williams is kept. If he is end up being released, then clearly they're going to have to go after some free agent receivers. So then we'll do another show on that. But the last 2 guys I want to bring up, and again, these are 2 more edge rushers that I think they can just get for real cheap. Start with the veteran, Everson Griffen. Love Everson Griffen. I think he had a phenomenal career with the Vikings, and then just 2 years ago, put up really good numbers. And last year was released, didn't get signed for forever. Ended up with Detroit. Didn't really play that whole much though. I believe he's 33 years old. I think you can get him back in LA, USC Trojan alum, back here for the vet minimum. He's going to want to show out, to finish his career strong, especially here in LA. I think he still has a lot of talent, still has a lot of skill. So he'd be a guy that he's not going to come in and, flash you for 8, 11, 12 sacks, but you could be a good, cheap option, very formidable, and be a solid, set piece, a third down pass rusher that you need. And I think he could be very good at that. So, and the last guy I'm going to mention is Porter Gustin. Porter Gustin, I believe after college, I believe he was drafted by the Vikings, was released, signed with the Saints, was released, signed with the Browns, and then ended up starting last year, not like the whole season, but started a lot of games for the Browns. And in those games was dynamic. He was fun to watch, man. All over the field, played with his hair on fire. Just a fun guy to watch. So this would be a guy you'd literally bring in for super cheap. He just wants to play ball. Bring him back to LA. Another USC Trojan alumni. I didn't even know. I did not do that on purpose. But I think I was just scrolling through these free agents that I think would fit, and I think he would fit great. And is a guy that I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but a guy that Brandon Staley could really get a lot out of. So, my voice is going hoarse. I'm not used to just being talking this much. Like I said, I wanted this to be 35 minutes. I don't know. I don't have the clock in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I'm well over an hour. So yeah. So like I said, once I get talking ball, I guess I can just talk. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you got some knowledge. Rams, Chargers fans. Hopefully you can see some of these realistic options. Rams is definitely a little tougher because of their cap situation. I think they can still sign key pieces that can help this team be a Super Bowl championship winning team. I just really don't think it's going to be these big name players like a lot of people on Twitter are saying. I just don't. Not saying it won't happen. I'm not sitting here saying 100% won't happen, blah, blah, blah. I personally just don't see it. I think we're going to see not lesser known, but cheaper options, role-playing guys that can come in and have a role, but as long as they do their job, this Rams team is still going to be very, very good and a Super Bowl contender. Chargers, on the other hand, have a lot more money to spend. I think they can get spendy at two positions, whether that's John Johnson and offensive guard, whether that's John Johnson and Carl Lawson on the edge. I think they can get spendy at two positions. And again, that could change if they end up releasing Mike Williams, if they end up cutting Trey Turner, then all of a sudden they jump to like 40 million. So then they have a lot more to spend. So a lot of things could be changing here in the next week or so. Also, if they're gonna, franchise tag Hunter Henry, that's 13 million on the books out of their 30. That's almost half. That changes things a lot too. So we'll see. But as it stands right now, those are, I think, realistic options for both teams. I think this is a critical offseason for the Chargers. The Rams, regardless, I think are still going to be a 10, 11 win team, a playoff team, but it's critical if they want to make a Super Bowl run, 100%, because, they could go to the playoffs again and lose in the first round. For the Chargers, this is a critical offseason to go from this 7-win team to a playoff team, which I said on 2 podcasts ago. I think this Chargers team can go from being a 7-win team to a playoff team. I don't know if I'm ready to say Super Bowl contender, but I think 100% they can win 10 or 11 games. They could have won 10 or 11 games last year. And now if they make the right moves, have a good draft, stay even just relatively healthy, this is a playoff team, I think. Killer Manzano wouldn't agree. He's a little more glass half empty, a little more glass half full. So there you have it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Frostee will be back with me on the next episode. Got a great guest lined up for you. This is the LA Football Podcast. Find me on Twitter at Ryan Dyrud, LAFB, the main account at LAFB Network. We are on YouTube as well. If you're not watching, if you're listening, check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. We really appreciate it. If you are on YouTube and you want to watch or listen during a commute, we are everywhere you listen. Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, everywhere you listen, we are. Just search LA Football, the Believe in LA Football podcast, or LAFB Network, and you will find us. Appreciate you all. Stay healthy, stay safe. I'm Ryan Dyrud. This is the LA Football Podcast. We'll talk to you all in a few days.